Join former FBI senior forensic examiners Becky Passmore and Stacey Eldridge as they dig into the world of digital forensics, one bite at a time. Now leading their own consulting firms and educating the next generation of cyber sleuths. These badass babes of digital forensics bring sharp insight, real-world case experience, and a dose of humor to the bits and bytes that build today's investigations. From deep dives into business email compromise and ransomware attacks, Becky's specialty, to cracking the complexities of iPhone forensics, Stacey's obsession. This podcast delivers insider knowledge for professionals, students, and true crime techies alike. If you've ever wondered what really happens when the digital trail is all that's left, tune in and start parsing the truth.
Welcome back to Parsing the Truth, one bite at a time, where we cut through digital noise to reveal how investigations really unfold. I'm your host, Stacey, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Becky.
Thanks, Stacey. We're excited for today's episode, one that hits organizations of every size we're about to tell you all about it.
Absolutely. And today we're tackling one of the most costly and misunderstood cyber crimes around: business email compromise, otherwise known as BEC. We'll explore how attackers manipulate inboxes, how investigators follow the trail in the cloud, and what organizations can do to prevent these crimes before money leaves the account.
Absolutely. And to help us break this down, we brought in a special guest. We have Jamie Mamroe. Jamie, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and let them know what you do? And we're very thankful to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Becky. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you all. First and foremost, I wanted to thank Becky and Stacey for having me on the podcast today. Seeing two women come together and just share the knowledge and expertise is truly phenomenal, and I'm honored to be a part of it. So, a little bit about me. So, I am a digital forensic examiner at Cyber Reason. They opened up their DFIR consulting services in January of this year. So, we're coming up on the 9-month mark, where we provide a variety of digital forensic investigations. That ranges from ransomware, insider threats. We also do tabletop exercises, as well as what I specialize in, obviously, and why I'm here today, business email compromises. So that includes, obviously, the most popular, Microsoft 365, also known as M365, Google Workspace, also known as G Suite, as well as Exchange. Prior to Cyber Reason, I was at Curl Cyber for 6.5 years, where I completed the same types of forensic investigations. That's also where I crossed paths with Becky. She was the Exchange Proxy Shell Pro there. I remember the first time hearing her talk, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get a hold of this girl. She has got to show me how she just did that. So, she was quick to jump on a call with me and show me everything. And then I was able to help out when she was swamped with Proxy Shell, with the M365 and G Suite cases. So, I truly love those days. And I'm happy to be here today talking about what I'm seeing on the front lines of PECs.
Awesome. And Jamie, so excited you're here to bring so much knowledge with you to this episode. And our listeners are just going to be fascinated by everything you say. I just know it. But some people might not be familiar, so let's start with the basics. BEC attacks aren't always malware-driven. They're human-driven, and I would say it's probably human-driven more often than not. But Jamie, you tell me if I'm wrong from what you've seen. So walk us through what that really means.
Right. So these schemes are where attackers are trying to compromise or impersonate an email. So they're trying to trick employees into wiring money, changing payment instructions, or handing over sensitive documents. So these kind of bypass the technical defenses, and they play and rely on deception, trust, and urgency. So they need that human user to fall for that phishing email, or that human to change the bank information or to make the appropriate changes.
Yeah. And again, going back to Jamie's introduction, when she talked about us crossing paths and Kroll and working together, we were great teammates. She also taught me everything I know about BECs and how I'm able to help companies now with my consulting firm if they call about a small BEC. So thanks for that, Jamie. So Jamie, What are the most common entry points you actually see?
So definitely phishing, right? Phishing is still the number one. I've also seen a lot of like vendor supply chains, right? So the vendor gets
Mm,
compromised, the
yeah.
TA sends invoices from the real vendor accounts and they just swap the bank information details. So, a lot of people aren't really asking a lot of questions about that. It's coming from a legitimate vendor account. They don't really think much of that. I do see a lot of MFA fatigue, right? The attackers see that MFA is enabled, they just start spamming the users with MFA prompts, hoping, right, eventually they're going to get sick of this. They're going to say, oh my gosh, yes, just stop the prompts. So we have seen that, right? They just overwhelm them with push requests. And it surprisingly is successful. MFA bypassing, though, kind of plays the same part, right? Phishing is kind of tied now with MFA bypassing. Unfortunately, right before it was, just enable MFA, that's your second line of defense. Now that's not so much the case. MFA really isn't a silver bullet. We recently did a TTP briefing where we took all of the data from our IR matters and we found that only 36% had MFA fully enforced across the board. And of those, the attackers bypassed it in over half of the cases. So, even when they had it enabled, it was still getting bypassed regularly.
Okay, so I have a
So,
question here.
yeah.
So when you're saying, they're doing all the MFA pushes, is that why I'm starting to hear and even see more about, it used to be you would have so many things where the MFA was push enabled. So you get the little pop up on your phone and you just be like, yes, yes. But now so many more of those have gone to, well, now I got to go and look up the code and whatever. Or is that
Yes.
just that is why?
Yes, yep, that MFA,
Gotcha.
yep, the spamming, right? That it's called MFA fatigue, right? They're just sending tons of MFA prompts where before, it's kind of standard. It was like approve, deny, yes, no questions for
Right?
MFA.
Yes. That
So
so nice.
yes, yes, very convenient for the users, but also a lot of factors we're noticing, right? That people are approving it even when they're not logging in. People are busy throughout the day. They're like, oh, maybe, my computer was trying to re authenticate. I didn't want to lose access. I was on the computer, but I was working on another file. And then, like, when we walk it back, they're like, I do remember approving something. And they didn't really tie the two together of like, oh, wait, somebody actually has my username, my password, and they were getting that push request now. So, it's actually a much bigger issue.
Yeah, well, and depending on some of your phone settings, you could hit approve without being logged in or, without unlocking your phone and stuff. And some people don't really pay attention. I would tell you when I used to work for a power company, if my CEO was on his phone the day the fish went out, he clicked on it every single time because he's just like, I'm doing a million things here at once. And he started to realize that and we kind of worked through some of that stuff to help him just be more conscious of taking a moment when he's on his phone before he's just like yes, 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 yes.
Yes. Yep. People are quick to click. That's for sure.
Mhm. Quick, I love it.
Yeah, I know. Some of the other ones we see too is like OAuth abuse. So instead of them stealing your password, the attacker just tricks the user into approving a malicious app. So, all they have to do is click accept on the screen. And now that app has access to the mailbox. And right, they didn't even need your MFA code. They don't need your password. They simply just need you to click accept and grant that app access to your email. So we've also seen a handful of those as well.
Gotcha. And there's, I'm sure, like a lot of red flags along the way, or aren't there? Are there some quick tells that can help us spot that email is not what it might be?
Absolutely. So there is always going to be that sense of urgency, right? They are going to want to make sudden changes to payment details. You might see some forwarding rules set up to outside domains or folders you don't commonly use. You can see logins from two locations at the same time, where that's impossible travel. You
Yes.
can
There are no
also
transporters yet.
yes, no, right. You're not logging in from Nigeria in New York within 3 minutes. There's no way. Atypical travel, just, abnormal login, right? If you're usually log in from an iPhone and all of a sudden you're logging in from a different type of device, there's certain flags that you can set up for that. And a lot of times, threat actors still mark these emails with high importance. So you might see that little red exclamation point. For some reason, they still love to add that. So anytime you get an email marked with high importance, with a sense of urgency, um, you know, something that's kind of leading you to bypass your normal procedures, I would, raise a flag to that and think, what's going on with this?
Yeah, all very interesting. So let's say a company realizes they're right in the middle of a BEC, that they have been attacked, someone has clicked it. And so let's just walk through the first 24 hours of what absolutely has to happen.
Course. So timing is everything, right? First, you need to contain the account. That means a password reset. You also have to revoke all active sessions. I can't tell you how many times we get in and they haven't done this yet, right? They reset the password and kind of carried on with their day and thought everything was great. The problem is those active sessions can still remain, even if you change that password. And that depends on your session length, right? And I have seen so many set to never expire. So
Mm.
that is extremely risky and not a great idea, right? We need to make sure we're monitoring what our session lengths are, right? Asking a user to re-authenticate every couple hours isn't unreasonable. I think that a lot of IT kind of are like, oh, we don't want to make it more difficult for the end user. So we don't want them to have to keep re-authenticating. But definitely, making sure we close out all active sessions. You're also going to want to check the registered MFA devices. A lot of times they love to get in and add their own device, right? That way, just in case they get closed out, they
Yep.
have another way in. Also, checking your inbox rules. Threat actors love to get in and they like to create inbox rules and move things to folders that, every day you're not checking. The RSS feeds folder, the conversation history folder, I would say are their two favorites. They move emails with anything they're trying to hide. It might be payment details, invoices, but I also see them going in a lot and adding the user, the account they used to originally phish them. They hide any emails from them, right? That way, if that user becomes aware that they sent outbound spam and they send an alert, hey, if you click this email, reset your passwords, it wasn't me, my account was hacked. They don't see those types of things.
Gotcha. Now, I did want to ask you about revoking the active sessions. Is that something a user can easily do, or this is something where IT really has to get on the ball and that's something they need to do?
Yes, unfortunately, that is something a global admin or an admin's going to have to do. They need access to the Azure portal, which you would need to be an admin.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I think sometimes that's maybe a weak link, right? Getting in touch with how many people have that access at the company and then making sure that they can do it in a timely manner. That's a great point.
Yes. The other thing, too, that I always kind of put in the first bucket for folks is checking the enterprise applications. Threat actors love to add enterprise applications. Just as another way they can grab data or maintain access to the account. So that's kind of what I put into the first bucket. The second bucket, I would say, is starting to preserve your evidence in the logs, right? You want to make sure that you have a copy of those logs saved, the emails, the headers before anything rolls off. And then also, if you are dealing with a payment misdirection, ensuring that you call the bank to try to recall the fraudulent wire. The earlier you act on this, the better and the higher chances you have of getting that money back.
Gotcha.
Some of the
Now,
next, oh, go ahead, Becky.
another question I could ask you is, I mean, you mentioned the wire details, but so many scams you hear about is like the CEO or some high executive emailing you and saying, I'm in a meeting, but I need these iTunes gift cards. Could you buy some and then send me pictures of them and scratch off all the codes? And I'm in this important meeting, but I really need these right now, so I'm not going to answer my phone. Would you throw that into kind of the business email compromise category, or that's more of just sort of your phishing, scamming? Or do you ever see that escalate from, okay, first I got you to send me some Apple gift cards or some other gift card, and now I'm going to escalate to something else a little bit later? What crazy things have you seen?
Yeah, so definitely seen the gift card scheme, right? Hey, we need to send a gift cards, or I can't order this right now, or can you send me? I don't have the card on me and I need to use it. Can you send me a picture of the company AMX card? I'm gonna
Well, that's
need.
a great one to
Yeah,
mention. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna need. I need the details. So if you just send me a picture of the front and the back, That way I can order this. I'm in with a highly classified client, and we really need this information as quickly as possible. And, sometimes like the urgency, start not thinking clearly, right? They think, oh my goodness, he needs this right away. I don't want him to be upset with me. Let me just send that over. So most of the time, right, it does stop there, right? They want to get to the gift card or get that card information, they move on. But I think if they do see a window there, right, they might try other things, right? And say, oh, okay, well, if they gave us those gift cards, what else can we try?
Yeah, well, they could certainly escalate from the gift card then to the credit card.
Oh, yeah.
That would make sense.
Yes.
So, how do we put all of these pieces together?
So for putting the pieces together, I would say is, you start to build your timeline. So everything that we do here is about telling the story. So we want to tell the users, and I usually build my timeline. And then when I'm trying to go through that, I try to explain it from like a non-technical point and make sure that I'm able to, explain to them so they understand exactly what happened. So I start to build out my timeline. I nailed down when the first login started or when the anomaly started in the logs, followed by, inbox rule creations. If I see any fraudulent messages being sent from the user, right, I'm looking at message trace reports, seeing what emails were sent, what emails the user received. If I do find emails where they're trying to change payment or wire instructions, including those. Another key part is the search terms. And I feel like that's kind of an underrated one, right? Most people
Mm.
overlook that. And in Microsoft 365, if the user pulls the search terms, they have a date and timestamp associated, which is huge, right? If I don't have logs, that could give me a really good starting point, right? A lot of times they get in, they're searching terms like payment, wire, CH, invoice. So if you do have limited logs, make sure you look to your search terms. The one thing I will point out is those search terms are pulled in local times. Whatever system pulled them, right? If Jane pulled them from her system and she's Eastern time zone, those are Eastern time zone. So if you're building your timeline in UTC, just make sure you convert those, right? Because it can really throw off your timeline. When I've done training before, I've looked at it and I'm like, that's really odd, right? The first search term is like 4 hours before the login. How would that work out? So just making sure, right, we're all in the same time zone when you're building it helps. And then, you can look for in the mailbox for the original phishing email and just start to build that timeline to tell the story.
And is there some things that we should make sure people know not to do right away?
Yes. So when it comes to remediation, definitely I do not go in and delete the account. I've seen IT go in and just fully hard delete the account out. They delete it, then they go to the deleted bin and fully delete it. So
Mm.
sometimes you can delete it, it'll remain there for 30 days, you can recover it, but I've seen people just go blow the account totally away. So definitely don't go do that, right? And also don't remove licenses or make licensing changes. I've seen them go and like strip licenses from the accounts, which can impact some of the logging. Also, for some reason, I've seen people go in and change the email address or the username, right? They add, something else, old account or new account, and that actually
Yeah.
changes the SID and the identifier there. So when you're trying to pair up your logs now, it's going to be a little bit of a nightmare to pair those up. I've had a couple of those cases where I'm like, why did this change all of a sudden? That doesn't really make much sense. They were always coming in as this identifier. Now I'm seeing this one. And then when you go to run it, right, you're like, okay, where'd this one come from? It doesn't show up in Azure because they deleted the account. So now you're having to sift through old raw data to try to pair that up with the username. So it just makes a little bit of a mess of the logs and it's just really unnecessary, right? If you reset the password, you revoke the sessions, check MFA, rules, applications, then you can start to preserve and review the data without making those type of drastic changes.
Gotcha. Now, what about law enforcement? Should they be contacted? When should they get involved? What are your thoughts on that, or what have you seen?
Yeah. So, especially with cross border wires, FBI or local agencies can sometimes help freeze funds before they disappear. They obviously have a much better grasp on those types of things, how they work. I will say that, they do say, right, the quicker you respond, the better and alert them. So I will say that, time is of the essence with that as well.
But I think still call your bank yourself trying to stop that wire first.
Absolutely.
Now, we're starting to get into maybe some more technical things as we dive deeper into this. Now, Becky's told me that you often say BEC doesn't just live in the inboxes, it's also living in the cloud. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. So the evidence lives in the cloud platforms themselves. So in Microsoft 365, we're pulling the unified audit log, the mailbox rules, the sign ins. In Google Workspace, you're pulling admin audit logs, the Gmail forwarding rules, and third party app access. It's also another piece of this is today's threat actors know that once you get access to an email account, it's not always limited to email, right? Now they have access to SharePoint and OneDrive files in Google, right? Google Drive, Google Docs, Google Sheets. We have seen them consistently get in and access SharePoint OneDrive files. Where some of these, finance employees are keeping bank information, right? Answers to security questions, passwords, even. And we've seen whole card numbers in there. So, people keep some highly sensitive data in SharePoint and OneDrive. That's also a piece that ties into the BECs that a lot of times I don't really see admins kind of correlating that. When we ask on the initial scoping calls, hey, did you check SharePoint, OneDrive? They're like, no, this is a business email compromise. We're like, okay, but those things are connected, right? If you go and you click up there, you get that whole suite right there. Do you guys use SharePoint and OneDrive? And then, all of those operations are logged in the unified audit log, which is fantastic. You can get a file access, a file previewed, a file downloaded. So you have good
Nice.
visibility into that.
So when you're putting it all together, are you building a timeline so that you can see how it has developed from an actual someone clicking a fish to um, the threat actors interacting with the email?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. I try to build the timeline right as thoroughly as possible. And I like to start at the initial start of the compromise. Like I said, a lot of times that starts with a phishing email. So, I try to go in and find that original fish. Even if the fish gets deleted, though, right? You can see in your unified audit log some soft deletes, some hard deletes, move to deleted items. Threat actors try to cover their tracks pretty well. So that can give you a hint at, what are they deleting, right? A lot of times they try to go in and delete that original fish, or they set up an inbox rule to hide communications from that person. And if they did delete it and hard delete it and you can't get it, you always have your message trace report, right? You can go back and see all of the emails that were received for the last 90 days. And, you can't
Wow.
see the contents of the email, but you can see the date and timestamp, the sender, the subject, your IP address that sent it, as well as the message ID and all of the information. So it's enough information, and a lot of times, right, the user writes back and says, "Hey Becky, I don't know what you just sent me, but I couldn't open this." So that's also right something to keep an eye out for in the sent mail. If they said, "Hey, would you send me? Couldn't open this," that way it gives you a good starting point.
That's fantastic. And, I think you're the first person I've heard talk about in relation to Office 365 or Microsoft 365 unified logs, because I'm hearing a lot about them because I focus on a lot of iPhone exams. And that's been a big thing we've really been breaking into. So it sounds like it's got a lot of very important details that you can grab from Microsoft 365 as well. So that's very exciting.
Yes, the unified audit log is one of the main logs that I review that actually has the most data. And Microsoft has come a long way, right? Last year, you would have needed an E5 license to get mail items accessed. Now they include that with your business standard licensing. So you can get every email the threat actor interacted with, right? You get the message ID, the information, granted, those emails have to be pulled out with e-discovery services, but still having an idea of the emails that the threat actor touched is huge in these investigations. So definitely it's come a long way with even their standard licensing.
Well, and I think you bring up a great point with the licensing, because I know when I was in a position of like, what do we need for security logs so we can try to figure out what happened versus how much is it going to cost us to get up to this licensure? And I was very lucky at a company of 400 employees. We had a very healthy security budget, but we certainly had to make some concessions because we're like, okay, we're going to have to pay X amount more per head just to get this log. Can we live without it? And and especially when you start going down smaller, what is your revenue? It sounds like they've done some great things in terms of adding in some more of that security information, some of those logs that you need at a lower level instead of having to pay an arm and a leg to get that information.
Absolutely, right, and they do have options, right? I would say for finance employees, it might be worth purchasing an E5, right? Getting that audit retention back a full year. And also, unified audit logging used to be only 90 days. They did up it to 180 days. So that gives us a lot more visibility with the standard licensing.
Gotcha. Another question. Is there a chain of custody for these types of investigations at the corporate level?
Yeah, so we make sure that all of our reports are defensible in court, and we do provide, expert witness services at Cyber Reason if we're requested to do so.
And so when we're talking about prevention, and I apologize, you can't see me all right now because I decided to be a ghost because I clicked on something and I can't get my camera to come back. So when we're talking about prevention, don't click on things and then your camera won't go away. How do organizations stay ahead, especially with as many phishing attacks are pushed out there every day?
Absolutely. So I would say think about this in layers, right? Think phishing resistant MFA, FIDO2, biometrics, things that can't be passed along, ensuring that legacy authentication is disabled, your POP, your IMAP, your SMTP, because those are legacy, right? So MFA wasn't a thing when those were around. So you'll never get an MFA prompt. So that's an easy win for threat actors. And we still see that being bypassed in exchange cases like to this day.
Well, I was going to say how much on-prem exchange is left out there.
You'd be surprised, Stacey. We still get
You
quite a bit
would
of
be
exchange.
surprised.
We get quite a bit of exchange cases. I'm
You
like,
would be surprised.
yeah, I'm like, we're still doing this with exchange. Okay. Yep.
Well, I think it's kind of the thing where, like, when I was at the power company and critical infrastructure, it's like, okay, well, something goes down and now we don't have access to anything. And then we just buy another service to back something else up. And so, I mean, I guess I'm not surprised that not everybody has been dragged kicking and screaming to leaving the prem.
Yeah, no, we still get quite a bit of exchange cases, right? The logs that you get are like 30 days max there. So the logging there is a little bit brutal to work with. Microsoft spoils us now, especially with them updating this, right? We can really paint that full picture.
So if you're going to be exchange on prem, then you better have a really good SIM and be sending all of your logs over there so you can have them for more than 30 days.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then you got to be able to afford the SIM to have your logs there for more than 30 days.
Yes,
It's a
the
lot of
hosting.
math to
Yes.
figure this out.
Yes, it is. It is pricey. It's a pricey business, but it's worth it if you need it, right? I feel like a
Yep.
lot of times people start to look into that after, like, oh, maybe we should have been 40. Maybe that would have been worth it, right? In this instance, right? We would have known, did they get a copy of everything? Did they just access it? We would have had more definitive answers that would be defensible in court. Because, right, we can only work with the evidence that we have. And that's kind of the front lines. Like every scoping call that I lead, that's my starting thing, right? We can only work with the logs and the data that we have. So if we get in and they don't have unified audit logging, I'm very honest with them about that. Like that does limit us, right? That limits our visibility. First and foremost, let's get it enabled from here forward. We do have logs and stuff. We can still make a little bit of magic happen, right? With some Azure logs, depending on licensing level. But just this week, we had one where unified audit logging wasn't enabled. And, my head was like, wow, still, I mean, we're 2025 and we don't have this enabled. And the worst part is, right, is Microsoft released a couple years ago. We have unified audit logging enabled by default now. So no worries. So a lot of these people are like, oh, yeah, it's enabled by default. No worries.
Yeah, and then they change it.
Well, what they-
Classic Microsoft move.
Well, what they don't say is it's enabled by default for newly created tenants. It's not enabled by default
okay.
for previous tenants, right? So they're not enforcing it for tenants, right? People that are actively paying for,
Yeah.
these subscriptions and these licenses, right? It's if you create a new tenant. So that's one thing I would caution people with is with Microsoft, just pay attention, right? If they do say, hey, we updated this, this is our new default, make sure you're checking, right? Because
Yeah.
make
Go
sure
go and
it's,
actually look.
yes,
Like, can you find the things that they say that are enabled now?
exactly. Or, right, is it if you create a new tenant, that's the default? Yeah. So definitely checking those things out. One of the big layers, though, for preventions, I would say, that we walk a lot of clients through is the conditional access policies. You can create some awesome conditional access policies and I've where users can only log in from registered devices. You can block non-US logins, restrict logins down to just their IP addresses. You can really limit things down in there. In Google Workspace, they have the same thing. It's just called context aware access. So, that includes kind of some monitoring for some impossible or atypical travel. So, really looking at the conditional access and how you can kind of, stack that on with MFA.
That's great. So, Jamie, are there any other trends that you're seeing in BECs?
Yeah, so we see a lot of compromised global admins actually. A lot of global admins are using these highly privileged accounts every single day to log in. Um, I strongly urge admins to have separate admin accounts that they only use for admin tasks, right? I don't want a global admin using their email every day, clicking on emails, trying to check out an email. We had one the other week where they were actually checking out an email for somebody who sent it to them with their global admin account. Yeah,
Nice.
so they got the global admin account. So, that's giving away the keys to the kingdom, right? Then the
Yes.
sky is the limit, right? We see them going in and adding access to all the payroll, all the finance employees. I mean, they can do anything they want with a global admin account. So, definitely seen quite a bit of compromised global admins lately.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that I remember when you and I worked a case together back in the day that it was the first time we'd ever seen where the threat actors installed um, a tool to actually export everything from the environment, and
Oh,
they were
yes.
pretty dang successful.
Yep,
Mm.
that was the M client case. I remember that one. Yep. So I remember reviewing the logs and I'm like, wow, client, I know that from my ransomware days. That's not good. And I remember them, even the engagement managers were like, no, I don't know. Like, let's look at it. Maybe IT was doing something. I'm like, we got a Nigeria
Mm.
IP doing this. I don't think so. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was good. We saw them adding those enterprise applications and a client actually can why I think a lot of them use it, right? Is it has the capability and supports multiple languages. So they can download a copy of the mailbox and read it in multiple different languages, which I didn't know that before. So we see them grabbing data that way. That way, when admins are looking, right, they're like, oh, we have web-based logins. There was no, and that's kind of where the ball turns, right? Is if they actually acquired data. That's kind of where some of the data privacy laws kick in, depending by state. Was any data acquired? So, that's something people also have to consider is the enterprise applications with the logins.
Well, so we get this question a lot. How has AI, because that is the, word of the century, how has that impacted BECs?
So the obvious one, right? There is much better social engineering in phishing emails. We're seeing phishing emails with perfect grammar, language, punctuation. That's kind of becoming the new norm. When I was chatting with Stacey earlier, I was like, when I first started, I could pick out a phishing email so quickly. I mean, it took me like 5 seconds. It would be, something wasn't capitalized, something was spelled wrong, the spacing was like way off. Now that's not the case, right? The grammar, the social engineering behind them is fantastic. We also have seen some deep fakes becoming more common. Deep fake video, isn't far behind. We haven't
Hmm.
seen a successful one, but I did have a really cool one where the user was trying to change bank information for one of the trust employees. But the bank had on file that they had to have a phone call with the number they have registered to change the information. And the threat actor wrote back and said, oh, you know what? They are on vacation this week, but I have a recorded conversation of us where they gave me verbal approval. So,
Perfect.
yeah, and they did send it. And I will tell you, having calls with her, I was like, wow, that did sound like you. So, luckily, though, the bank was like, no, this isn't good enough, right? We need a phone call from that number giving us permission. So it wasn't successful, but it got close, right? They were all the way at the final ticket there. And luckily, right, they had somebody at the bank following full procedure that day.
That's so great that they actually followed the procedure because that's half the battle. Well, knowing that there is a procedure and then following said procedure after you read it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and of course, right, they had that urgency, like this has to be done today. They're going to be using this card tomorrow and they're on vacation and this is highly important. So, they still added the urgency in there.
Yeah. And, some people might be tempted to be like, oh, well, we'll do like a video verification or whatever. And your point, deep fake isn't far behind because I don't know if you've seen, it was like an interview video going around and the interviewee, he looked kind of like, I don't know, he was answering stuff, but he looked like a little stone or maybe he was on some ketamine or something like that. It just wasn't quite like tracking right. And then so the interviewing manager was like, I need you to put your hand in front of your face. Well, they could never do it. And then eventually they got them to put the hand up next to their face, but they couldn't put it in front of their face. So I'm not sure what's up with that, but I guess just a fun fact for everybody. If you think you're on an AI video sort of call, maybe you'd be like, put your hand in front of your face.
Oh gosh.
See, look, people, we're live.
Yes.
Two hands.
We're
We're
Yes,
here.
you
real.
are. I am behind this black screen over here because I clicked a button.
Well, maybe you will come back on the upload, Becky. We will find out. Right now,
Gosh.
Becky is just a voice in the dark.
I am just a voice in the dark.
Okay, so we've gotten a little off track, but that's what we do sometimes. So let's see. Let's talk about, I think, scale. What's happening with that? I think AI can probably help you scale faster, better.
Oh, yeah. So the scale with AI, right? They're big, right? They have a lot of different powerful searches, right? They're scraping and they are able to craft some heavily customized spear phishing messages, that you can send to thousands of victims at a time. You can throw it right in Chat GPT. Hey, can you create me, this type of email? I want it to be crafted to the specific sender, and it can create you that template in seconds. So, just people having that and actors having that at their fingertips definitely, I think, will play a role.
Interesting. And so we've done a lot of talk about phishing. I'm going to ask you a question for your opinion on phishing exercises, phishing your own employees. Anything you want to say about that or what you've seen or what your clients ask or anything related to that?
Absolutely. So we strongly encourage, right, phishing testing and training for all of the employees, right? And the ones that are struggling with it, obviously, we need follow up there. We need to make sure they're understanding. And also, threat actors are always changing the tactics of phishing emails. They've changed drastically in the 7, 8 years that I've been doing this. So, it's hard, right? IT sees this stuff every day. They need to kind of come at it from a different perspective of like, these people don't see this every day. They're not aware that AI has helped craft much better phishing emails, much more believable emails. I've also seen places start to incentivize. If a user doesn't fall for any fishes in 30 days, they get a gift card, they get some type of reward. And I've seen that actually be highly effective, right? People think twice, like, whoa, hold on. There's a reward involved. I don't know if I want to click this. I'm going to call or report this email. So it just makes them kind of think twice about that. Also, like tabletop exercises are great for that, right? You can come at it from a business email compromise standpoint and let people kind of run through their current playbooks. And I will say that a lot of the ones that we see are very dated, right? They're not taking into consideration new Microsoft changes or new changes in the logs or when they're asked to go into this portal to pull it, they're like, where's George? I think George knows how to get to that portal. There's,
Mhm.
they're relying on one person for certain things, so making sure they have those updated playbooks and they're testing the employees and really just taking the time to educate them on new
Yeah.
tactics, new tendencies. And I think it's very important for them to have an open line of communication, right? If they did click it, they should have the confidence to come to IT and say, hey, listen, I got a weird email. I did click it, but nothing happened. So, I think my account could be compromised and kind of self reporting We've seen quite a bit of those cases. Actually, they're starting to self report a little bit more. And I tell you, that really contains the spread quickly. If the user reports it and says, hey, I did this, but it didn't seem right. I reset my password, and then IT can kind of take the reins from there because, right, the threat actors aren't always, logging right in with these passwords. So sometimes they're able to get in, reset passwords, close active sessions before anything even happens, right? Best case scenario. So just making sure users have a good way to communicate that as well.
Yeah, and I think with like the phishing emails, some organizations do the same phishing training like every year. It's just the whatever cheap out of the box, whether it's the videos or PowerPoint slides that they have people doing, and that's not really adding value
No.
and education. I have also seen where people are using know before for the phishing emails, and everything's coming from know before. So I'm like,
Right.
I know that's the phishing test. So, if you're going to do it, put some effort into it, because then I think like when it comes to your cyber insurance, one of the questions is, do you have like what are the things you're doing for training and education and phishing education? And if you're doing it half-assed, I don't know any other way to say it, I don't know if they're going to pay out. They'll be like, well, you said you were training, but I don't think this is training. You're not doing what you said you're doing. I don't know. My 2 cents on that.
Absolutely. I say that all the time. Underwriters and them need to really make sure that these policies are actually effective in working, not just checking a box, making sure that these are actually working and the end users, right, are getting their training that they need to be able to spot these types of things.
Well, and I've even been on conversations with the insurance company. I filled out the survey, and I guess I'm just a hard ass or very conservative, but I'm like, no, we're not doing this. No, we're not doing this. No, we're not doing this. And they're like, oh, well, you do this one thing. We'll count that for that, and we'll count this for that. And I'm like,
Well, that's a stretch. Yeah.
I'm like, I don't think that counts, but you're the one who's going to pay up.
That's right.
Let me get a recording of you saying that this counts.
Right. Yeah.
So I think we're getting towards the end. Jamie, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share that we didn't get in yet?
Oh, I feel like we kind of covered like the only thing that I didn't really talk about that I think I should probably mention, right, is some of the common ways we see actors, bypassing MFA. I feel like
Yeah.
there is two kind of big players that we see, adversary in the middle is probably the top one, right? That's where you open what looks to be a real Microsoft 365 login page, but it's a fake site, right? Set up by the threat actor that's forwarding everything you type to Microsoft. As you're typing your password, your MFA code, you're thinking you're safe. It looks like Microsoft, but then the attacker is able to, catch the keys while it's getting passed along. So MFA doesn't stop it because the attacker is kind of sitting there in the middle. The other one that I see a lot is the session hijacking and cookie theft, which is, you log in, the system gives your browser a session token. I like to explain this to people. I'll think of it like your hotel key card, right? You go
Right.
to the hotel, you show your ID, you give them your card, you pay for it, right? You've done all of the things, you get that key card to access your room every time. From then on, you don't need to keep doing that, right? So the attacker steals that token through malware, phishing, the adversary in the middle. So they don't need to keep re-authenticating. They can just keep using that session until it expires. Those are kind of the two ways that we see threat actors really bypassing MFA.
That is super interesting. And, people might not realize it's happening, but I think it's something good for us techie type people to be aware of how they're getting in there, how they're staying in there. That's awesome.
Well, yeah, for sure. For sure. Well,
Alrighty.
to wrap up, BEC, excuse me, is a proof that attackers don't always need ransomware or 0 days. They just need one convincing email and trusted inbox. So for investigators, the truth lives in cloud logs, mailbox rules, and audit trails. For organizations, resilience means hardened technical controls, quick response, and disciplined processes.
And Jamie, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all of your expertise and experiences with us.
Of course. Thank you both for having me. Always glad to help raise awareness.
Absolutely. And Jamie, it's great to see you. Keep up the good work. Go after, take care of those companies. And thanks to our listeners. If you find today's episode useful, share it with your finance team, IT staff, or leadership. And until next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and as always, keep parsing the truth one bite at a time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us to get notified the next time a new episode drops. If you can do more, head on over to parsingthetruth.com and donate by clicking on the donate button. Parsing the Truth is a nonprofit organization, and we are raising money to send a new digital forensic examiner to IASIS training next year in Orlando. Thanks.